well, the likelihood that a startup fails is pretty high. I think how many, 8 in 10 or even more fail? That's just part of the game.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on how long, in the long run, almost all companies fail, right?
Yeah, okay.
So we really want to think about it as like, how long do they last? It turns out that in Denmark, which is where I did a lot of this research, as well as in the US, the average company, so 50% of companies make it to about 4 years, right? And then if we look at, let's say 6 years, we'd be looking at maybe about 35% of companies making it to 6 years. And if we were looking at, say 10 years, we'd probably be looking at maybe 25% of companies. So that 8 of 10 failing is about right if you're thinking about maybe a 10 or 11-year arc.
Okay, that's interesting to know. And of these, so if I'm a young guy, I want to get a job, I've got the options to work for a typical company or for a startup. If I'm solely in it for the money, I would have to bet more on the startup, because if it fails, going back into corporate world does not give me really any money benefit. That's
yeah. Well, you probably, I mean, if you're really in it just for the money, you want to probably go straight to the corporate job, right?
Okay. What about the big bet with the equity in a startup? We all know it's like the big lottery ticket. A lot of people
exactly
work in that become part of the startup, especially at the very early phases, are like dreaming about that. Okay, I'll have my percentage of the multi-billion-dollar company, of course. What do you study? You studied that aspect too. So what?
Yeah, so we looked a little bit at that. I mean, in Denmark, that's less of an issue. And one of the reasons why is that in Denmark, equity awards are taxed like income. So if you're a startup employee, you really don't want to get stock, right? Because you're going to get taxed by the Danish government, and it's going to be illiquid stock that you can't even sell to pay your taxes, right? So it's kind of like the worst of both worlds. In the US and many other countries where equity is taxed, the options in particular are taxed at the time they're exercised, then it's more attractive because you only have to pay tax on it if it ends up being valuable and if you end up selling the options. But even in the US, what ends up happening is that very few people make it to the point where they're getting options. If you sort of think about those stats, it's not just the one in, let's say 1 in 4, if we're thinking about something like 75% lasting 10 years. To actually have the equity award payoff, there has to be some type of, equity exit, either an acquisition for a fair amount of money. Oftentimes smaller acquisitions don't end up paying out much to the employees because the investors, the venture capitalists, are the first ones to get paid out, right? And so only if it's a very large acquisition is there enough cash to pay off the employees, or in an IPO. But, if you think about, kind of how many companies are getting backed by, say, venture capital relative to the number that are getting, having an IPO, you're talking about like 1 in 100 kind of chances of, oftentimes of getting a payout.
So you've got a very, very low chance for the company to survive at all. And then if it survived, you've got a very low chance that you get a part of the acquisition money.
Right, exactly.
If you like this clip, watch another one. And if you want to see the whole interview, click here.